The emergency dispatcher's fingers flew across the keyboard as the panicked voice crackled through her headset. It was 2:47 in the morning, and the man on the other end of the line could barely form coherent sentences. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each word punctuated by what sounded like genuine terror. "Please, you have to help me. My wife, she's gone. I can't find her anywhere. We were just walking on the beach and now she's disappeared. Please, send someone now." The dispatcher kept her voice steady, professional, even as she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something about this call felt different from the usual tourist emergencies she fielded from the luxury resorts dotting the coastline of Turks and Caicos. "Sir, I need you to calm down and tell me your location." "What's your name?" "Alex. Alex Chen. We're staying at the Paradise Cove Resort, Villa number 12. Please hurry. Something's happened to Morgan. My wife, Morgan. We've only been married 5 days. 5 days. A honeymoon." The dispatcher's heart sank as she dispatched emergency services to the location. She'd been doing this job for 11 years, and honeymoon calls never ended well. She stayed on the line with Alex Chen, listening to him describe how they'd gone for a romantic midnight walk along the private beach, how they'd argued about something small, how Morgan had walked ahead of him, and when he'd caught up to where she should have been, she was simply gone. Vanished into the Caribbean night like a ghost. Within minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the tropical darkness. Police cruisers and an ambulance screamed down the narrow resort road, their lights painting the palm trees in alternating shades of red and blue. Officers found Alex sitting on the sand near their villa, his white linen shirt torn at the collar, his face buried in his hands. When he looked up at the approaching officers, his eyes were red and swollen, his cheeks wet with tears that caught the moonlight. "She's out there somewhere," he told Detective Maria Santos, who had arrived shortly after the first responders. "We have to find her. Please, we have to find Morgan." Detective Santos had seen her share of missing person cases over her 15-year career with the Turks and Caicos police force. She'd worked everything from lost tourists who'd wandered too far from their hotels after too many rum punches, to more sinister disappearances that ended with bodies washing up on shore weeks later. Something about Alex Chen's demeanor set off alarm bells in her mind, but she kept her suspicions to herself. For now, this was a missing person case, and every minute counted. "Mr. Chen, I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight. Start from the beginning, from dinner. Don't leave anything out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Alex wiped his face with the back of his hand and nodded. His voice shook as he recounted the evening's events. They'd had dinner at the resort's main restaurant around 8 o'clock. The seafood had been excellent, the wine flowing freely. They'd laughed, taken photos of their meals to post on social media, held hands across the table like the newlyweds they were. After dinner, they'd gone to the beachside bar for cocktails, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Everything was fine, Alex insisted, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke. "We were happy. We were celebrating. This was supposed to be the best time of our lives." But then, he admitted, things had shifted. Around 11:30, as they sat at the bar, Morgan had brought up something that had been bothering her. Alex claimed it was nothing serious, just wedding stress that had followed them to Paradise. She'd been quiet on the walk back to their villa, he said, and when they got there, she'd suggested they go for a walk on the beach to clear the air. "I thought it would be romantic," Alex said, his voice breaking. "The moon was full, the water was calm. I thought we could talk things out, reconnect. Instead, I lost her." As Alex spoke, Detective Santos made careful notes. She observed everything about him, the way his eyes darted around, how his hands trembled, the genuine seeming anguish in his voice. But she also noticed other things. The slight bruising on his knuckles. The way he kept touching his left shoulder as if it pained him. The sand on his clothes that seemed inconsistent with someone who'd simply been walking on the beach. By 4 in the morning, the resort had transformed into a command center. Search and rescue teams combed the beach with high-powered flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness like lightsabers. Canine units were brought in, their handlers letting the dogs sniff items from Morgan's suitcase before setting them loose along the shoreline. The Coast Guard launched 2 boats, their searchlights scanning the dark water for any sign of a person in distress. Alex sat in the resort's security office, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm tropical air, watching the search unfold on multiple security monitors. The resort manager, a thin man named Marcus Webb with a British accent and worried eyes, brought him coffee that went cold and untouched. In 20 years of managing this resort, Marcus said quietly to Detective Santos, "We've never had anything like this happen. This is supposed to be paradise. People come here to celebrate the happiest moments of their lives." Detective Santos nodded but said nothing. She'd requested copies of all security footage from the past 24 hours, and 2 of her officers were already reviewing it in an adjacent room. She'd also asked for a list of all staff members who'd interacted with the Chens during their stay, as well as any other guests who might have seen or heard anything unusual. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that mocked the tragedy unfolding below, a radio crackled to life. One of the search teams had found something near the rocky outcropping at the far end of the resort's private beach. Detective Santos's blood ran cold at the tone in the officer's voice. "We need the detective down here immediately. And call the coroner." The walk to the location felt like it took hours, though it was less than 10 minutes. Detective Santos's boots crunched on the sand, her heart pounding with the terrible certainty of what she was about to find. Behind her, Alex Chin was being held back by 2 officers as he screamed Morgan's name over and over, his voice raw with desperation. Morgan Chin lay among the rocks like a broken doll, her white sundress torn and stained with blood, her dark hair spread around her head like a halo. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful despite the obvious trauma to her skull. The rocks beneath her were slick with blood that had mixed with seawater, creating pink pools in the crevices. Detective Santos knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Her trained eyes catalogued every detail. The angle of Morgan's neck. The defensive wounds on her forearms. The pattern of blood spatter on the rocks that told a story far different from the one Alex Chen had provided. This was no accident. This was no tragic slip during a midnight walk. This was violence, deliberate and brutal. The coroner arrived within the hour, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Patricia Flores who had seen more death than most people could imagine. She worked with quiet efficiency, photographing the body from every angle, taking measurements, collecting samples. When she finally stood up and pulled off her latex gloves, her expression was grim. Preliminary findings suggest blunt force trauma to the head, multiple impact points. There are defensive wounds on her arms and hands, contusions around her throat. This wasn't a fall, Maria. Someone did this to her. Behind the police tape that now cordoned off the area, Alex Chin collapsed. The officers holding him back struggled to keep him upright as his legs gave way. His wails of anguish echoed across the beach, sending early morning joggers scrambling back to their villas. The resort staff stood in clusters, whispering among themselves, their faces pale with shock. Detective Santos watched Alex carefully. She'd seen guilty people fake grief before, had watched murderers sob over the bodies of their victims with tears that seemed entirely real. She'd also seen innocent people destroyed by loss, broken by tragedy they couldn't comprehend. The question was, which was Alex Chen? "Take him back to the station," she told her officers quietly. "Get him cleaned up, get him some water, and don't let him talk to anyone. I want a full statement as soon as the shock wears off." As Morgan's body was carefully loaded onto a stretcher and covered with a white sheet, Detective Santos turned her attention to the crime scene itself. The location bothered her. It was nearly 400 yards from the villa where the Chens had been staying, around a rocky point that couldn't be seen from any of the resort's buildings. If Morgan had simply been walking and slipped, why would she have come all this way? The path was treacherous even in daylight, nearly impossible to navigate safely at night. She walked the route herself, her flashlight beam sweeping across the sand and rocks. There were footprints, multiple sets, some obviously from the search and rescue teams, but others that looked older. She found what appeared to be drag marks in the sand, partially washed away by the tide but still visible in protected areas between the rocks. Someone had moved something heavy along this path, something that had left a trail. Back at the police station, Detective Santos sat across from Alex Chin in a small, windowless interrogation room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by grief and exhaustion. A paper cup of coffee sat untouched on the table between them, steam no longer rising from its surface. The recording equipment hummed softly in the corner. "Alex, I need you to walk me through the evening again. I know this is difficult, but we need to understand exactly what happened." Alex looked up at her with bloodshot eyes. His voice was hoarse from screaming Morgan's name on the beach. "I already told you everything. We had dinner, we had drinks, we went for a walk. She was upset about something, and she walked ahead of me. When I caught up, she was gone." "What was she upset about?" Alex hesitated, his fingers picking at a loose thread on his shirt. "It was stupid. Wedding stuff. She thought I'd been distracted during the ceremony, checking my phone when I should have been focused on her. She wasn't wrong. I had some work emails that I'd been dealing with, and she saw me looking at my phone during the reception. She was hurt." "So you argued?" "Not argued, exactly. She was disappointed. She said she felt like I wasn't fully present, like I was already thinking about going back to work instead of enjoying our honeymoon. I told her she was wrong, that she was everything to me, but she didn't believe me." Detective Santos made notes, her pen scratching across the paper. "What happened when you got back to the villa after the bar?" "She wanted to go for a walk. She said the fresh air would help her clear her head. I didn't want to go at first because it was late and dark, but she insisted. She said we needed to talk things through, that she didn't want this hanging over us for the rest of the trip." "So you went willingly?" "Of course. I wanted to fix things. I wanted her to know how much I loved her." Alex's voice cracked on the last word, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Tell me about the walk. Where did you go? What route did you take?" Alex closed his eyes, as if trying to visualize the path. "We walked along the main beach first, heading away from the resort buildings. The moon was bright, so we could see pretty well. We were talking, trying to work things out. Then Morgan said she wanted to see the rocks at the end of the beach. I told her it was too dangerous in the dark, but she said she'd be careful." "Did you follow her to the rocks?" "I started to, but my phone rang. It was a call from work, a client emergency. I told Morgan I just needed to take it quickly, that I'd catch up to her in a minute. She got angry again, said I was proving her point about being distracted. She stormed off toward the rocks." Detective Santos leaned forward, her eyes locked on Alex's face. "How long were you on the phone?" "I don't know. Maybe 5 minutes? Maybe 10? Time felt weird. I was trying to handle the call as quickly as possible because I knew Morgan was upset." "And when you finished the call?" "I went after her. I called her name, but she didn't answer. I thought maybe she was ignoring me because she was angry. I walked to the rocks, but I couldn't see her. I started calling louder, getting worried. I walked all along that area, looking everywhere. That's when I panicked and called 911. The story sounded plausible enough, but Detective Santos had been doing this long enough to know that the most convincing lies were the ones wrapped in truth. She needed to check Alex's phone records, verify the timing of that work call. She needed to see the security footage, track their movements throughout the evening. Most importantly, she needed to wait for Dr. Flores's full autopsy report. "Alex, I need to ask you something difficult. Had you and Morgan been having problems before the wedding?" Alex's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly defensive. What? No. We were great. We loved each other. No financial issues? No disagreements about the future? Every couple has minor disagreements, but nothing serious. We were solid. Detective Santos sat back in her chair, studying him. What do you do for work, Alex? I'm a financial advisor. I manage investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients. Must be stressful work. It can be, but I'm good at it. I've built a strong client base over the past 6 years. Strong enough to afford a resort like Paradise Cove for your honeymoon? Alex's expression shifted slightly, something guarded creeping into his eyes. We saved up. Morgan and I both contributed. Her parents also gave us some money as a wedding gift. Detective Santos made a note to look into Alex's financial situation. In her experience, money was one of the most common motives for murder, second only to infidelity. I'm going to need access to your phone, Alex. For the records. Why? I didn't do anything wrong. It's standard procedure. We need to verify your timeline, confirm that work call you mentioned. It helps us establish the facts. Alex hesitated, then slowly pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. His hand trembled slightly as he did so. Detective Santos bagged it as evidence, watching his reaction carefully. He looked like a man who'd just surrendered something precious, something incriminating. Am I under arrest? Alex asked quietly. Not at this time. But I do need you to stay in Turks and Caicos while we investigate. You're not to leave the island. Where would I go? My wife just died. My wife was murdered. The last word came out as a choked sob, and Alex buried his face in his hands again. Detective Santos left him in the interrogation room and walked down the hallway to where 2 of her officers were reviewing security footage from the resort. Officer James Torres looked up as she entered, his young face troubled. Detective, you need to see this. The footage showed the resort's beach sidebar from multiple angles. Detective Santos watched as Alex and Morgenstern sat together, drinks in front of them, their body language telling a story very different from the romantic evening Alex had described. At 11:42, according to the timestamp, Morgan leaned across the table, her face animated, clearly upset about something. Alex's response was dismissive, a wave of his hand, his attention on his phone rather than his wife. Can you enhance the audio? Detective Santos asked. Torres shook his head. The bar doesn't have audio recording, just visual. But watch what happens next. On screen, Morgan stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. She said something else to Alex, her finger pointing at him accusingly, then turned and walked away. Alex sat there for another 3 minutes, still looking at his phone, before he finally stood up and followed her. The timestamp read 11:47. Now watch this, Torres said, switching to a different camera. This one showed the path leading from the main resort area toward the private villas. At 11:53, Morgan appeared on screen, walking quickly, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked back once, as if checking to see if Alex was following, then continued out of frame. Where's Alex? Detective Santos asked. That's the thing. He doesn't appear on this camera for another 8 minutes. At 12:01, he comes into frame, but he's not hurrying. He's walking casually, still looking at his phone. Detective Santos felt a chill run down her spine. 8 minutes was a significant gap. Where had Alex been during those 8 minutes? What had he been doing? Is there footage of their villa? No cameras point directly at the private villas. Resort policy, for guest privacy. But we do have footage of the beach access points. Torres pulled up another clip. This camera covers the northern beach access, which is the closest one to Villa 12. At 12:03, both Alex and Morgan appear together. They're clearly arguing. The grainy footage showed the couple on the beach, Morgan gesturing wildly, Alex standing with his arms crossed. Even without audio, the tension between them was palpable. Morgan turned away from him, heading toward the darker end of the beach where the rocks were. Alex stood still for a moment, then followed her. That's the last footage we have of either of them until Alex appears back at the villa at 2:21, 26 minutes before he called 911. Detective Santos watched the clip 3 more times, studying every detail. The timeline was becoming clearer, and it didn't support Alex's version of events. He'd claimed they went back to the villa after the bar, that Morgan had suggested the beach walk once they were there. But the footage showed them going directly to the beach from the bar area, and the argument had clearly been ongoing. Pull his phone records, she instructed Torres. I want to know every call, every text, every internet search for the past month. And get me Morgan's phone. Where is it? We haven't found it yet. It wasn't on her body, and it's not in the villa. Then it's somewhere out there, and we need to find it. That phone could tell us everything. While her team continued to process evidence, Detective Santos drove to the hospital where Dr. Flores was conducting the autopsy. The morgue was cold and clinical, the smell of disinfectant failing to completely mask the underlying odor of death. Morgan Chen's body lay on a steel table, covered by a sheet except for the parts Dr. Flores was examining. Tell me what you found, Detective Santos said, skipping any pleasantries. Dr. Flores looked up from her work, her eyes tired behind her glasses. Multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head and face. 3 distinct impact points, suggesting she was struck at least 3 times. The weapon was likely a rock, based on the irregular pattern of the wounds. I found traces of sand and limestone in the wounds that matched the rocks at the scene. Could the injuries have been caused by a fall? Absolutely not. The angle and force of the impacts are inconsistent with a fall. Someone struck her deliberately, with significant force. I'd estimate the assailant was right-handed, based on the trajectory of the blows. What about the defensive wounds? Extensive. She fought back hard. There are bruises and abrasions on her forearms, broken fingernails on both hands with tissue under them. She scratched her attacker, Maria. If we can find who she scratched, we have our killer. Detective Santos felt a surge of hope. Did you take samples? Of course. I've sent everything to the lab for DNA analysis. We should have results within 48 hours. What about time of death? Dr. Flores consulted her notes. Based on body temperature, rigor mortis, and lividity, I'd estimate death occurred between midnight and 1 in the morning. The cool water temperature makes it harder to pinpoint exactly, but that's my best estimate. The timeline was tightening like a noose around Alex Chen's neck. If Morgan died between midnight and 1, and Alex didn't call 911 until nearly 3, what had he been doing for those 2 hours? The story about searching for her didn't hold up, not when the search area was relatively small and Morgan's body was in a location that should have been one of the first places he looked. Detective Santos returned to the station to find that Alex's phone records had come through. She spread the printouts across her desk, highlighting key entries. The work call Alex had mentioned did exist, logged at 12:14 in the morning, lasting exactly 4 minutes. But there were other calls and texts that painted a very different picture of Alex Chen's life. In the 3 weeks leading up to the wedding, Alex had made 17 calls to a number registered to a woman named Jessica Brennan. The calls ranged from 2 minutes to over an hour. The text messages were even more damning. Detective Santos read through them with growing certainty, each message another nail in Alex Chen's coffin. I can't do this anymore, one text from Jessica read, sent 5 days before the wedding. You said you were going to call it off. Alex's response, I know. I'm sorry. It's complicated. Just give me more time. Jessica, time? You're getting married in less than a week, Alex. You told me you loved me. You said Morgan was a mistake. Alex, she is. You're the one I want. But I can't just cancel the wedding. Her parents have spent over $50,000. Everyone's expecting it. I'll figure something out after the honeymoon. The messages continued, each one more desperate than the last. Jessica begging Alex to be honest with Morgan. Alex making promises he clearly had no intention of keeping. The last message from Jessica came the morning of the wedding. I hope you know what you're doing. I hope she's worth losing me over. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to leave her. Alex never responded to that final message. He'd married Morgan that afternoon, smiled for the cameras, danced with his bride while another woman sat somewhere alone, heartbroken and angry. Detective Santos picked up her phone and dialed Jessica Brennan's number. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice thick with sleep. Hello? Ms. Brennan, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Turks and Caicos Police Force. I need to speak with you about Alex Chen. There was a long pause, then a sharp intake of breath. What's he done now? I'd rather discuss this in person. Are you currently in the United States? I'm in Miami. Why? What's going on? Alex Chen's wife was found dead this morning. I'm investigating her murder. The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Oh my God. Oh my God. Morgan's dead? You knew Morgan? I knew of her. Alex talked about her sometimes. He said she was nice but that they weren't right for each other. He said he only proposed because he was afraid of being alone, but then he met me and realized what real love felt like. Jessica's voice was bitter now, angry. I'm guessing that was all lies. I need you to tell me everything about your relationship with Alex, Ms. Brennan. When it started, what he told you, everything. Over the next 40 minutes, Jessica Brennan unraveled Alex Chen's carefully constructed double life. They'd met 8 months ago at a financial conference in Chicago. Alex had told her he was single, successful, looking for something serious. They'd started seeing each other whenever Alex traveled for work, which he claimed was often. Jessica had no idea he was engaged to Morgan until she saw the engagement announcement on his social media 3 months into their affair. I confronted him, Jessica said, her voice shaking with emotion. I told him he needed to choose. He swore he would break up with Morgan, that he'd only proposed because he felt obligated, because their families were friends. He said he needed time to do it right, to not hurt her too badly. But he never broke up with her. Obviously not. He kept making excuses. The engagement party was already planned. The venue was booked. Morgan would be devastated. Her parents would hate him. On and on. I started to realize he was never going to leave her, that I was just the other woman, the one he kept hidden away. When was the last time you saw Alex? 3 weeks before the wedding. He came to Miami for what he said was a business trip. We had dinner, and I told him it was over unless he called off the wedding. He said he would. He promised me. Then I saw the wedding photos on social media, and I knew he'd lied to me about everything. Detective Santos made careful notes, her mind working through the implications. Alex Chen was a liar and a cheater, but that didn't necessarily make him a murderer. Unless Morgan had found out about Jessica. Unless she'd confronted him on their honeymoon, threatened divorce, threatened to ruin his reputation and his career. Ms. Brennan, did Alex ever mention anything about life insurance? There was a pause. That's a weird question. Why? Please just answer. He mentioned once that he'd taken out a policy on himself, something about protecting his future family. He asked if I thought that was romantic, like he was thinking long-term. I thought he meant a policy for us, for our future together. Why? Detective Santos didn't answer. She thanked Jessica for her time, asked her to remain available for further questioning, and hung up. Then she put in a call to her financial analyst, a sharp woman named Carmen Rodriguez who could track money trails like a bloodhound. Carmen, I need you to dig into Alex Chen's finances. Everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments, debts, and especially any life insurance policies. I need to know if he's broke, if he's in debt, and who stands to benefit from Morgan Chen's death. On it, detective. Give me 2 hours. While she waited, Detective Santos decided to interview the resort staff who'd interacted with the Chens during their stay. The bartender who'd served them on their final night was a young man named Marcus, 23 years old, working at the resort to pay for college. He'd been behind the bar for 4 years and had seen countless honeymoon couples pass through. They were different from the start, Marcus told her, sitting nervously in the resort's security office. Most newlyweds can't keep their hands off each other, you know? They're all lovey-dovey, feeding each other, taking selfies. But Mr. and Mrs. Chen, they seemed tense. Distracted. Tell me about their last evening at the bar. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to remember. They came in around 9:30, I think. Ordered 2 mojitos. Mr. Chen was on his phone a lot, barely paying attention to his wife. She kept trying to start conversations, but he'd just nod and go back to his phone. After the second round of drinks, she seemed really upset. Did you hear what they were arguing about? Not clearly. The bar was pretty busy, and I was mixing drinks. But I heard Mrs. Chen say something about her at one point. She said I know about her, Alex. I know everything. He tried to calm her down, told her she was being paranoid, that the stress of the wedding was making her imagine things. Detective Santos felt her pulse quicken. Morgan had known about Jessica. She'd confronted Alex about the affair. That changed everything. What happened after that? Mrs. Chen got up and left. Mr. Chen sat there for a few more minutes, still on his phone, then he paid the tab and followed her. I remember thinking their honeymoon was not going well. Did you see them again after that? No, that was the last time. I finished my shift around 1 in the morning. The next thing I knew, there were police everywhere and people were saying Mrs. Chen was dead. Detective Santos thanked Marcus and moved on to interview the housekeeper who'd been assigned to the Chen's villa. Maria Gonzalez was a 50-year-old woman who'd worked at Paradise Cove for 15 years. She had a gentle face and sad eyes that had seen too much of other people's pain. I cleaned their villa every morning, Maria said in accented English. The first 2 days, everything seemed normal. The bed was messy like newlyweds, you know? Their things were everywhere, clothes on the floor, towels wet from the shower. But by the 3rd day, something changed. Changed how? The bed, it was not slept in together. One side was perfect, still made. The other side was messy. And I found a pillow and blanket on the couch, like someone had slept there. Also, there were wine glasses broken in the trash, and I saw a hole in the wall of the bedroom, like someone had punched it. Detective Santos felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Did you report this to anyone? Maria shook her head, looking guilty. No. I thought maybe they had a fight, but couples fight sometimes, especially when they're stressed. I didn't think it was my business. Now I wish I had said something. Maybe Mrs. Chen would still be alive. This isn't your fault, Maria. You couldn't have known. But even as she said the words, Detective Santos knew they were hollow comfort. The signs had been there. The tension. The separate sleeping arrangements. The violence expressed through a hole punched in a wall. Morgan Chen had been living with a man who was capable of explosive anger, and no one had intervened. Detective Santos's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen Rodriguez. The financial analysis was complete, and she needed to see it immediately. She thanked Maria for her time and headed back to the station, her mind racing with the implications of everything she'd learned. Carmen was waiting for her in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and bank statements. Her expression was grim as she gestured for Detective Santos to sit down. Alex Chen is drowning in debt, Carmen said without preamble. Credit cards maxed out to the tune of $175,000. most of it gambling debts from online poker sites and sports betting. He's been hiding it well, making minimum payments, juggling balances between cards, but he's one bad month away from bankruptcy. Does Morgan know? Did Morgan know? That's the interesting part. 3 weeks ago, there was a joint account inquiry. Someone accessed both their credit reports. My guess is Morgan found out about the debt and started digging. What about life insurance? Carmen slid a document across the table. 2 weeks before the wedding, Alex increased Morgan's life insurance policy from $50,000 to $500,000. He's the sole beneficiary. The premium increase was significant, but he paid it in full using a cash advance from one of his credit cards. Detective Santos stared at the document, her hands trembling slightly. This was premeditation. This was motive. Alex Chin had married Morgan Chin knowing he was going to kill her, knowing he needed her insurance money to cover his gambling debts and save his failing financial advisor career. The honeymoon wasn't a celebration of their love. It was the execution of a carefully planned murder. There's more, Carmen said quietly. I pulled Alex's search history from his laptop, which we seized from the villa. 2 months ago, he searched how long after wedding can you collect life insurance. 3 weeks ago, accidental death clause life insurance policy. 1 week ago, drowning death statistics Caribbean. The night before they left for their honeymoon, he searched how to delete search history permanently. But he didn't delete it. He tried. But he's not as tech-savvy as he thinks. Our forensics team recovered everything. Detective Santos felt a cold fury building in her chest. Alex Chen had planned this. Every detail, every step. He'd married a woman he didn't love, taken her to paradise, and murdered her for money. And he'd almost gotten away with it. She called her team together for a briefing, laying out everything they'd discovered. The affair with Jessica Brennan. The financial motive. The search history. The security footage contradicting his timeline. The autopsy results proving murder. The DNA under Morgan's fingernails that would almost certainly match Alex's scratched arms. The case against Alex Chin was solid, airtight, damning. We need to arrest him now, Officer Torres said. Before he figures out how much we know and tries to run. Agreed, Detective Santos said. But first, I want to search for Morgan's phone. It's still missing, and I think Alex hid it. There might be evidence on it that seals the case completely. Text messages, photos, voice recordings. Morgan knew something was wrong. She might have documented it. They organized a search team and returned to the resort. This time, they focused on areas Alex would have had access to after Morgan's death. The villa itself had already been processed, but Detective Santos had a theory. If Alex had killed Morgan around midnight and didn't call for help until nearly 3 in the morning, he'd had 2 hours to cover his tracks. 2 hours to hide evidence, to clean himself up, to prepare his story. She walked the path from the murder site back to the villa, thinking like a killer. Where would Alex have hidden Morgan's phone? It had to be somewhere easily accessible but not obviously connected to him. Somewhere the tide wouldn't reach. Somewhere it wouldn't be immediately discovered. Then she saw it. A small maintenance shed near the beach access point, partially hidden by palm trees. The door was unlocked, used by resort staff to store beach chairs and umbrellas. Inside, behind a stack of folded loungers, she found a pink phone case. Morgan's phone. The screen was cracked, but the phone still powered on. It was locked, but Detective Santos had Morgan's fingerprint from the autopsy. Within minutes, she was scrolling through Morgan's messages, photos, and call logs. What she found there made her blood run cold. Morgan had known about Jessica. She'd hired a private investigator 2 weeks before the wedding, after finding suspicious charges on Alex's credit card. The investigator had provided photos of Alex and Jessica together, text message transcripts, hotel receipts. Morgan had documented everything in a folder on her phone labeled evidence. But she'd made a fatal mistake. Instead of calling off the wedding, she'd decided to confront Alex on their honeymoon, away from family and friends, where they could talk privately. She believed she could fix things, that Alex would choose her once she showed him the evidence, once she made him see what he was throwing away. The last text message on her phone was sent to her sister at 10:30 on the night she died. "I'm going to talk to him tonight. I'm going to show him everything I know and give him one chance to be honest with me. If he can't do that, I'm filing for divorce as soon as we get home. I deserve better than this." Her sister had replied immediately. "Morgan, please be careful. If he's been lying about all this, who knows what else he's capable of. Just come home. We'll deal with this together." Morgan never responded to that message. 20 minutes later, she'd gone to the bar with Alex. 30 minutes after that, she was confronting him about the affair. By midnight, she was dead. Detective Santos held the phone in her hands, thinking about Morgan Chen. 29 years old, a talented graphic designer, beloved daughter and sister. She'd trusted the wrong man, believed in a love that was nothing but lies. She'd thought she could save her marriage, never knowing her husband had already decided she was worth more dead than alive. "Get me Alex Chen," Detective Santos told her officers. "It's time to end this." They found Alex back at the police station, still in the holding area where they'd asked him to wait. He looked up hopefully when Detective Santos entered, as if expecting good news, expecting to be cleared and released. His hope died when he saw her expression. "Alex Chen, you are under arrest for the murder of Morgan Chen." Detective Santos's voice was hard, uncompromising. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Alex's face went white. "What? No. You can't be serious. I didn't kill Morgan. I loved her. Someone else must have." "Stop talking, Alex." Detective Santos cut him off. "We have your phone records showing your affair with Jessica Brennan. We have your search history proving premeditation. We have security footage contradicting your entire timeline. We have the autopsy results showing Morgan was murdered, not killed in an accident. We have your financial records showing your gambling debts and the life insurance policy you took out on Morgan 2 weeks before the wedding. And we have Morgan's phone with all the evidence she'd collected against you." With each revelation, Alex seemed to shrink further into himself. The color drained from his face entirely, and his hands began to shake uncontrollably. "But the most damning evidence," Detective Santos continued, "is the DNA we found under Morgan's fingernails. She fought back when you killed her, Alex. She scratched you, tore your skin. We saw those scratches on your arms during questioning, and you claimed they came from the rocks while you were searching for her. But the DNA will prove they came from Morgan's desperate attempt to defend herself as you beat her to death with a rock." "I want a lawyer," Alex whispered. "I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer." "Smart choice. Though it's a bit late for smart choices, don't you think?" As the officers led Alex away in handcuffs, Detective Santos felt a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. Justice would be served. Alex Chen would pay for what he'd done. But Morgan Chen would never come back. Her parents would never walk her down the aisle at a real wedding. Her sister would never get to be an aunt to Morgan's children. All the dreams and possibilities that had existed 5 days ago when Morgan stepped onto that plane to paradise were now nothing but ashes. The news of Alex Chen's arrest spread quickly. Within hours, media outlets across the United States and Caribbean were running the story. Honeymoon horror, man arrested for murdering new wife in paradise. The resort, Paradise Cove, saw immediate cancellations as couples decided they didn't want to celebrate their love in a place where someone had been murdered. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Morgan's family arrived on the island 2 days after the arrest. Her parents, Richard and Susan Chen, looked like they'd aged 10 years in the span of a week. Susan's eyes were perpetually red and swollen, her hands shaking whenever she tried to speak. Richard moved like a man in a trance, going through the motions of identifying his daughter's body, signing paperwork, making arrangements to take Morgan home. Morgan's sister, Emily, was different. She burned with a cold, focused rage that reminded Detective Santos of herself. Emily was 31, a lawyer in Boston, and she'd taken a leave of absence from her firm to see justice done for her little sister. "I told her not to marry him," Emily said, sitting across from Detective Santos in the station conference room. "I knew something was off about Alex from the beginning. He was too smooth, too perfect. Everything he said sounded rehearsed, like he was playing a role." "Did you voice your concerns to Morgan?" "Of course I did. Multiple times. But she was in love, or at least she thought she was. She said I was being overprotective, that I didn't like any of the men she dated. She accused me of being jealous of her happiness." Emily's voice broke on the last word, tears spilling down her cheeks despite her obvious attempt to hold them back. "You couldn't have known what he was planning." "But I knew something was wrong. I should have dug deeper, hired that private investigator myself before the wedding instead of after. If I'd found out about his affair and his debts earlier, Morgan might still be alive." Detective Santos reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "Listen to me carefully. This is not your fault. The only person responsible for Morgan's death is Alex Chen. He made the choice to lie, to cheat, to kill. Nothing you could have done would have changed that." Emily nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't quite believe it. Detective Santos understood. Survivor's guilt was a powerful, destructive force. Emily would carry this burden for the rest of her life, always wondering what if, always replaying those final conversations with her sister. "I want to testify at his trial," Emily said, her voice hardening. "I want to look him in the eye and tell the jury what kind of man he is, what he took from us." "You'll get your chance. The prosecution will want victim impact statements." "Will he go to prison? Can you guarantee that?" Detective Santos chose her words carefully. "The evidence is overwhelming. DNA, financial motive, search history, phone records, witness testimony, security footage. Any one of these things might not be enough on its own, but together? Alex Chen is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I'm confident of that." The DNA results came back 3 days after Alex's arrest, confirming what Detective Santos already knew. The tissue under Morgan's fingernails matched Alex's DNA profile. The scratches on his arms had come from his wife's desperate struggle for survival. There was no reasonable doubt, no alternative explanation. Alex Chen had killed Morgan Chun with his own hands. Alex's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Robert Castellano who'd flown in from Miami, tried to negotiate a plea deal. Life in prison instead of life without parole, in exchange for a guilty plea and a full confession. The prosecution, led by a fierce woman named Diana Torres, refused. "We're going to trial," Diana told Detective Santos over coffee in her office. "The evidence is too strong, and Morgan's family deserves to hear the truth in open court. They deserve to see him convicted by a jury of his peers. Alex might take the stand and claim it was an accident, that they argued and things got out of hand. Let him try. The search history alone proves premeditation. You don't accidentally Google how long after wedding can you collect life insurance if you're planning a happy marriage. The jury will see right through him." The trial began 6 months after Morgan's death. The courtroom in Providentials was packed with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and people who'd known Morgan and wanted to see justice served. Alex sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his expression carefully neutral, his lawyer whispering strategies in his ear. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Diana Torres walked the jury through every piece of evidence, building a timeline that left no room for doubt. She called witnesses from the resort who testified about the couple's arguments. She presented the security footage showing Alex's lies about their movements that night. She brought in Dr. Flores, who explained in clinical detail how Morgan had been murdered, how she'd fought for her life. "The defendant wants you to believe this was a tragic accident," Diana said during her opening statement, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "He wants you to believe that his young, healthy wife somehow fell on the rocks in a way that resulted in 3 distinct blunt force trauma wounds to her head, defensive wounds on her arms, and his DNA under her fingernails. He wants you to believe that he spent 2 hours searching for her before calling for help, despite the fact that she was found in one of the most obvious locations. He wants you to believe that his Google searches about life insurance payouts were innocent curiosity. He wants you to believe that his affair with Jessica Brennan meant nothing, that his crushing gambling debts were manageable, that the $500,000 life insurance policy he took out on Morgan 2 weeks before their wedding was just good planning." Diana paused, making eye contact with each juror. "But you're smarter than that. You can see through his lies just like Morgan finally did on the last night of her life. Alex Chen married Morgan not because he loved her, but because he needed her dead. He took her to paradise so he could kill her far from home, far from anyone who might save her. And when she confronted him about his lies, about his affair, about the debts she'd discovered, he decided that silencing her permanently was easier than losing the life insurance payout. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this was not an accident. This was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. The defense's strategy was predictable. Robert Castellano painted Alex as a flawed but loving husband who'd made mistakes but would never harm his wife. He suggested that Morgan's death could have been an accident, that perhaps she'd fallen during their argument and Alex, panicked and traumatized, had failed to find her in the dark. "My client made poor choices," Castellano admitted during his opening statement. He had an affair. He accumulated debt. He wasn't honest with Morgan about these things. But having an affair doesn't make you a murderer. Being in debt doesn't make you a killer. At worst, Alex Chen is guilty of being a bad husband. But the prosecution wants you to convict him of murder based on circumstantial evidence and speculation. But the prosecution's case was too strong. Jessica Brennan took the stand and described in painful detail how Alex had lied to her, promised her a future, made her complicit in his betrayal of Morgan. Carmen Rodriguez presented the financial evidence, showing the jury exactly how desperate Alex's situation had been. The search history was displayed on large screens, each incriminating query hovering in the air like an accusation. The most powerful testimony came from the forensic experts. Dr. Flores described Morgan's injuries with scientific precision, explaining why they were absolutely inconsistent with an accidental fall. A digital forensics specialist walked through Alex's phone and computer records, revealing the depth of his deception and planning. A DNA expert confirmed that the tissue under Morgan's fingernails matched Alex's genetic profile with a probability of 1 in 7 trillion. When it came time for the defense to present their case, Robert Castellano had little to work with. He called character witnesses who testified that Alex had always seemed like a nice guy, a good friend, someone incapable of violence. But their testimony rang hollow against the mountain of physical evidence. He tried to suggest that Morgan could have been killed by a stranger, but couldn't explain how a stranger would have access to a private resort beach, or why Alex's DNA was under her fingernails. The moment everyone had been waiting for came on the 8th day of trial. Alex Chen took the stand in his own defense. It was a desperate gamble, but his lawyer had few options left. If Alex could convince the jury that he'd loved Morgan, that her death had been a tragic accident, maybe they'd find reasonable doubt. Alex spoke softly, his eyes downcast, projecting remorse and grief. "I loved Morgan," he said, his voice cracking. "She was my wife, my partner, my best friend. Yes, I made mistakes. The affair with Jessica was wrong. The gambling was wrong. I should have been honest with Morgan about everything. But I never wanted to hurt her. I certainly never wanted her dead. Tell us what happened that night," his lawyer prompted gently. We'd been arguing about my phone use during the wedding. Morgan felt like I wasn't present, wasn't engaged. She was right. I'd been distracted by work, by my financial problems, by the stress of everything. We went to the bar to talk things through, and she confronted me about Jessica. She'd hired a private investigator. She had proof of everything. How did that make you feel? Ashamed. Embarrassed. Terrified of losing her. I tried to explain, to apologize, but she was so angry. She said she wanted to walk on the beach to clear her head, to decide whether our marriage could survive this. I followed her, begging her to give me another chance. And then what happened? Alex took a shaky breath, tears streaming down his face. We were near the rocks, and she turned to face me. She said she couldn't trust me anymore, that she wanted a divorce. I was devastated. I reached out to touch her arm, to plead with her one more time, and she pulled away from me. She took a step back, lost her footing on the rocks, and fell. I heard this terrible sound, like a crack, and then she wasn't moving. What did you do? I panicked. I climbed down to where she was, tried to wake her up, but there was so much blood. I couldn't think straight. I was terrified and in shock. I know I should have called for help immediately, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Eventually, I realized I needed to get help, so I ran back to the villa and called 911. It was a convincing performance, delivered with just the right amount of emotion. But Diana Torres was ready. During cross-examination, she systematically destroyed Alex's testimony. Mr. Chen, you testified that Morgan fell backward and hit her head on the rocks, is that correct? Yes. And yet Dr. Flores testified that Morgan had 3 distinct impact wounds on her head, from 3 different angles. Can you explain how a single fall backward could result in 3 separate impacts? Alex hesitated, his confident demeanor faltering. I don't know. Maybe she hit multiple rocks as she fell? Dr. Flores also testified that the angle and force of these impacts were consistent with someone being struck repeatedly with a rock held in a right hand. You're right-handed, aren't you, Mr. Chen? Yes, but that doesn't mean. Let's talk about the timeline. You claim you were in shock after Morgan fell, that you couldn't think clearly. But security footage shows you returning to the villa at 2:21 in the morning, over 2 hours after Morgan would have died according to the coroner's estimate. What were you doing for 2 hours if you were so desperate to get help? I was looking for her. I was confused about where she'd fallen. The beach was dark. The beach was lit by a full moon that night. Multiple witnesses testified to that. And Morgan's body was found in the most obvious location, the only major rock formation on that stretch of beach. Are you really telling this jury that it took you 2 hours to find your wife's body in the one place she could possibly be? Alex's face reddened. I was in shock. I wasn't thinking rationally. Let's talk about your Google searches, Mr. Chen. 2 months before your wedding, you searched how long after wedding can you collect life insurance. Why would a man planning a happy marriage need to know that information? I was just curious. I was taking out a policy and wanted to understand how it worked. And 3 weeks before the wedding, you searched accidental death clause life insurance policy. Why? Same reason. Research. 1 week before the wedding, you searched drowning death statistics Caribbean. Were you researching that too, Mr. Chen? Or were you planning exactly how to murder your wife? Objection. Robert Castellano jumped to his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said. Ms. Torres, rephrase. Diana nodded, never taking her eyes off Alex. Mr. Chen, can you think of any innocent reason why a groom would need to research drowning statistics in the exact location where he was taking his bride for their honeymoon? I was concerned about safety. I wanted to make sure the resort was safe. Is that why you increased Morgan's life insurance policy from $50,000 to $500,000 2 weeks before the wedding? For safety? Alex squirmed in his seat. I wanted to make sure she was protected if anything happened to me. But you're the beneficiary, Mr. Chen. You would collect the money if something happened to Morgan, not the other way around. So I'll ask again, why did you increase her policy to $500,000 2 weeks before taking her to an island where you'd researched drowning statistics? I don't know. It seemed like the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing to do would have been to pay off your $175,000 in gambling debts instead of hiding them from your fiancé. The responsible thing to do would have been to end your affair with Jessica Brennan instead of lying to both women. The responsible thing to do would have been to call off the wedding when you realized you didn't love Morgan. But you didn't do any of those things, did you? I made mistakes, but I didn't kill my wife. You've testified that Morgan pulled away from you when you reached for her, causing her to fall. But Morgan had defensive wounds on her arms. Bruises and scratches consistent with someone trying to protect themselves from an attacker. How do you explain those? Maybe she got them when she fell. Maybe she tried to catch herself on the rocks. Your DNA was found under Morgan's fingernails, Mr. Chen. The scratches on your arms that you claimed came from searching for her in the rocks match exactly with Morgan's hand position during the autopsy. She didn't scratch you while you were searching for her. She scratched you while you were killing her, didn't she? No. That's not what happened. Then explain to this jury how your DNA got under her fingernails. Explain how she got defensive wounds while falling backward. Explain the 2-hour gap. Explain the Google searches. Explain the life insurance. Explain why everything about your story is a lie. Alex's composure shattered completely. His face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks, but whether they were tears of guilt or simply fear of being caught, no one could say. I loved her, he whispered. I loved Morgan. If you loved her, Mr. Chen, she'd still be alive. Diana turned away from him, addressing the jury directly. Love doesn't search for ways to profit from death. Love doesn't increase insurance policies before planned trips. Love doesn't hide affairs and debts and lies. What Alex Chen felt for Morgan wasn't love. It was opportunity. And when she discovered his lies and threatened to divorce him, taking away his financial lifeline, he killed her. That's not love. That's murder. The prosecution rested their case after Alex's testimony. The defense called a few final witnesses, experts who tried to create reasonable doubt about the DNA evidence, the timeline, the interpretation of the search history. But their efforts felt hollow, desperate attempts to save a client who'd already damned himself on the stand. The closing arguments took place on a Thursday afternoon. Diana Torres spoke first, her voice calm but forceful as she walked the jury through the evidence one final time. Morgan Chen was 29 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was talented, kind, beloved by her family and friends. She made one mistake, just one. She fell in love with the wrong man. She trusted Alex Chen with her heart, her future, her life. And he betrayed that trust in the most horrific way possible. Diana displayed a photo of Morgan on the screen behind her. Not a crime scene photo, but a picture from happier times. Morgan smiling at the camera, her eyes bright with joy and hope. Morgan discovered Alex's affair and his debts days before their wedding. Any reasonable person would have called it off, walked away, started over. But Morgan believed in love. She believed in second chances. She thought she could fix things, that if she just talked to Alex, showed him how much she loved him, he would choose her over his lies. So she married him. And she went with him to paradise, believing they could work through anything together. Diana's voice hardened. But Alex Chen didn't want to work through anything. He'd already decided that Morgan was worth more to him dead than alive. $500,000 in life insurance would solve all his problems. It would pay off his gambling debts, save his business, give him a fresh start. All he had to do was kill the woman who loved him. She turned to face Alex directly. So he took her to an isolated beach at midnight. He provoked an argument. And when she turned to walk away from him, when she tried to leave a toxic situation that she'd finally recognized for what it was, he picked up a rock and struck her. 3 times. Hard enough to crack her skull. Hard enough to end her life. And then he left her body among the rocks like garbage and waited 2 hours before calling for help, making sure she was dead before anyone could intervene. Diana returned her attention to the jury. The defense wants you to believe this was an accident, a tragedy born of passion and fear. But the evidence tells a different story. The Google searches tell a story of premeditation. The life insurance policy tells a story of financial motive. The DNA evidence tells a story of a violent struggle. Morgan's phone, hidden by Alex and later recovered by police, tells a story of a woman who knew she was in danger but hoped love would save her. It didn't. Alex Chin killed his wife for money. And now it's your job to hold him accountable. Robert Castellano's closing argument was shorter, less confident. He focused on reasonable doubt, suggesting that perhaps the police had rushed to judgment, that maybe there were alternative explanations for the evidence. But even he seemed to know his efforts were futile. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces were grim and certain. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair, stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Alex Chen, on the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Morgan's mother collapsed in her husband's arms, sobbing with relief and grief. Emily sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. Alex's face went blank, emotionless, as if his mind had simply shut down to protect itself from the reality of what was happening. Detective Santos, sitting in the back of the courtroom, felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Justice. It wasn't enough, could never be enough to bring Morgan back, but it was something. Alex Chun would pay for what he'd done. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Morrison who'd presided over the trial with firm efficiency, listened to victim impact statements from Morgan's family before delivering Alex's sentence. Emily spoke first, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "My sister was my best friend. She was kind, creative, full of life and dreams. She wanted to travel the world, start her own design business, have children someday. Alex Chin stole all of that from her. He stole her from us. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone in our lives will be marked by her absence. He gets to live, even if it's behind bars. Morgan doesn't get that chance. She's gone forever because he valued money more than human life." Morgan's father spoke next, his voice breaking with emotion. "I walked my daughter down the aisle 5 days before she died. I gave her away to a man I thought would protect her, cherish her, build a life with her. Instead, he took her to paradise and murdered her. No father should have to bury his child. No parent should have to see their baby's body on a morgue table. The pain of losing Morgan will never fade. But knowing that her killer will spend the rest of his life in prison gives us some small measure of peace." Judge Morrison listened to each statement, her expression grave. When the family had finished, she turned her attention to Alex, who sat at the defense table staring at his hands. "Mr. Chen, I've presided over many murder trials in my career. I've seen crimes of passion, crimes of desperation, crimes born of mental illness or tragic circumstances. But your crime was different. You didn't kill in a moment of rage or fear. You planned Morgan's death methodically, coldly, over the course of months. You researched. You prepared. You increased her life insurance. You married her knowing you intended to kill her. And when the moment came, you beat her to death with a rock and left her body among the debris like she was nothing." The judge's voice grew harder. "The jury has found you guilty of first-degree murder. Given the premeditated nature of this crime, the financial motive, and the complete lack of remorse you've shown throughout these proceedings, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars, which is more mercy than you showed Morgan Chen on the last night of her life." Alex was led from the courtroom in shackles, his face still blank, still refusing to show any emotion. Detective Santos wondered what he was thinking, whether he felt any remorse at all or simply regret at being caught. She would never know. Outside the courthouse, Morgan's family held a brief press conference. Emily served as spokesperson, her voice stronger now, steadier. "Today justice was served for my sister. Alex Chen will never hurt anyone else. But our fight isn't over. We're starting the Morgan Chen Foundation, dedicated to helping women recognize the warning signs of dangerous relationships. Financial control, isolation, explosive anger, these are red flags that too often go unrecognized until it's too late. If Morgan's story can save even one life, if it can help one person leave a dangerous situation before it turns deadly, then something good will have come from this tragedy." The questions from reporters came fast and furious, but Emily handled them with grace and composure. She was channeling her grief into purpose, transforming her pain into something that might protect others. It was all she could do, all any of them could do, in the face of such senseless loss. Detective Santos returned to her office, filed her final report on the case, and closed the folder on Alex and Morgan Chen. But she knew she'd never really close it, not completely. Morgan's face would stay with her, another ghost in a career full of them. Another reminder of why the work mattered, why justice had to be pursued even when it couldn't undo the damage that had been done. 3 months after the trial ended, Detective Santos received a letter from Emily. Inside was a photo of Morgan, smiling and full of life, and a simple note. "Thank you for not giving up on my sister. Thank you for seeing through Alex's lies and building a case that brought him to justice. Morgan deserved better than the hand she was dealt, but because of you, she at least got justice. The foundation is up and running now, and we've already helped dozens of women leave dangerous situations. Morgan's death won't be in vain. Her story will save lives. Thank you for making sure her killer couldn't hurt anyone else." Detective Santos pinned the photo to her bulletin board, among the other cases she'd solved over the years. Success stories, though calling them that always felt wrong when someone had died. But they were victories nonetheless. Small triumphs against the darkness that sometimes consumed people, turning love into violence, marriage into murder. Paradise Cove Resort eventually recovered from the scandal, though it took years and a complete rebranding. The villa where the Chens had stayed was torn down, replaced with a meditation garden dedicated to Morgan's memory. Couples still came to celebrate their honeymoons there, though now they did so with a strange awareness, a shadow of knowledge about what had happened on those white sand beaches. Alex Chen adjusted to prison life, or at least learned to survive it. He maintained his innocence for the first year, filing appeals that were systematically denied. Eventually, he stopped fighting, stopped claiming he'd been wrongly convicted. Whether that represented acceptance of his guilt or simply resignation to his fate, no one could say. He would die in prison, decades from now, unmourned and unforgiven. The honeymoon that ended in murder became a cautionary tale, a true crime story told and retold in documentaries and podcasts and articles. People dissected every detail, analyzed every decision, debated whether Morgan should have seen the warning signs, whether she could have saved herself. But those debates missed the point entirely. Morgan Chen wasn't responsible for her own death. She was a victim, pure and simple. The only person responsible was the man who'd promised to love her and chose to kill her instead. In the end, that's what it came down to. Trust betrayed. Love perverted. A promise broken in the most final, irreversible way possible. Alex Chen had stood before witnesses and God and pledged to honor and cherish Morgan Chen until death did them part. He just hadn't mentioned that he planned to make death come sooner rather than later, that his wedding vows were nothing but lies designed to lure an innocent woman to her doom. Paradise became a graveyard. A honeymoon became a murder scene. And love, which should have been the beginning of a beautiful story, became nothing but an ending. Morgan Chen deserved so much more than that. She deserved the life she'd planned, the dreams she'd nurtured, the future she'd believed in. Instead, she got 5 days of marriage before her husband decided she was worth more dead than alive. The waves still crash on the beaches of Turks and Caicos. The sun still sets in shades of pink and gold. Couples still walk hand in hand along the sand, making promises about forever. But now, among those couples, there are whispers about the woman who came to paradise and never left, about the honeymoon that ended in murder, about the man who killed for money and lost everything that makes life worth living. Morgan Chen's story is over, but her legacy continues. In the foundation that bears her name. In the lives saved by women who recognized the warning signs and walked away. In the small acts of justice that Detective Santos continues to pursue, one case at a time. And in the reminder that love should never come at the cost of safety, that trust should never be given to those who don't deserve it, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who promised to protect you forever. The honeymoon that ended in murder will never be forgotten. And neither will Morgan Chen, the bright, talented, hopeful young woman whose only crime was believing in love. She deserved better. She deserved everything. She deserved life. And though justice was served, though her killer will spend his remaining years in a cell, the world is diminished by her absence. That is the real tragedy, the one that no verdict can fix, no sentence can remedy. Morgan Chen is gone, and all the justice in the world can't bring her back.